Good morning and welcome to the STS-31 post-flight crew press conference. Our crew of 5 has about 20 minutes of film and 26 or 7 slides with which to share their unique and rare perspective of this mission. And with that, I'll turn it right over to Crew Commander Lauren Schreiber.
Thank you, Jeff. First of all, let me welcome everybody here this morning in the room and around the country who's listening in. If it hasn't been apparent so far in all of our discussions, we really enjoyed flying this mission, and we believe that we had a very successful mission overall. We did exactly what the mission set out to do, and it was just unbelievable end to end. And what we tried to do throughout was document as best we could what was actually taking place at the time we were doing it. And that's what we want to do this morning then, is update everybody by means of a film that we've put together and also show you some slides after that. Before we get into that though, in case anybody does not know the rest of the crew members, on my right is Charlie Bolden, the pilot, and did just a little bit of everything on board the shuttle while we were up there, and we'll have words from him as the movie goes on. Bruce McCandless, MS-1, he was our HST expert on all of its systems, and also, of course, EV-1, and almost the guy to open the hatch and go outside and almost crank open the second solar array. Dr. Steve Hawley, next to him, he was our RMS operator, MS-2, going uphill and during entry, and did an excellent job, of course, of maneuvering the HST on the end of the magic wand, so to speak. And then Kathy Sullivan, MS-3 for the flight, again, also EV-2, and just about had her hand on the airlock depress valve to go that extra 5 psi to get down to vacuum for that almost EVA that we did. With that, and in order not to take up too much time so that we have time for your questions at the end, let's go ahead and get started with the film. We'll be narrating as we go, and one thing I would like you to try to pay attention to as the film unravels is the rather continuous pictures of the Earth in the background. And this is some of the beautiful scenery that we were seeing always in the background whenever you look outside and it's daylight, some of the very beautiful pictures of the Earth as the rest of the events unfold. So why don't we go ahead and roll that film. Let's hope it. This, of course, our mission patch, and we like it a lot. We think it told a story all of its own, very appropriate for the flight. This is the morning of launch, going through all of our suit-up drill, and each one of us then goes through a pressure check, a suit integrity check, and you see that in progress here for all 5 of us sort of in turn.
The suiting up has added a little time to the morning's event, so we split the crew 2 and then 3 so that we can all arrive at a common state of readiness and walk out together, as you see here.
The trip to the launch pad's relatively quick. It was dark, as you could all see. You get out there, and I think you've heard it said by other crew members that you get out there and there's a little bit different on launch morning because the vehicle seems to be alive. This is actually the main engine start, which occurs roughly 6 to 7 seconds before the liftoff, and then the solid rocket boosters ignite. On board this time, I think I was a little bit more sensitized to everything. I actually felt the main engine ignition inside, and you could feel the twang of the vehicle, and everybody feels the solid rocket boosters ignite because you get lots more noise and vibration, and with the suits, which none of us had worn before, you actually end up bouncing around inside this little environment of your own. Our ascent was pretty much a normal, what we call direct insertion, where we actually did not do an OMS or an orbital maneuvering system 1 burn. We just allowed ourselves to glide on up to basically a 331 by 27 or 47 nautical mile orbit before we did our insertion burn. The main engine cutoff velocity was a little bit faster than we normally see, roughly 26,000 feet per second. And the most impressive thing to me was the way we could not see the Earth after MECO.
As you all know, our altitude was unique for the shuttle program. We went to 330 miles circular orbit. It was truly noticeable and impressive from on board, and we hope that we were able to share some of that with you on the downlink television. First thing every crew does is get the orbiter configured for being on orbit, and of, I think, particular concern to our crew was the number of activities that we had to accomplish on flight day one, including checking out the RMS, which you see us doing here. We do that early in the flight, of course, because if there were failures with the arm, we would have overnight and the next morning to try to figure out what the impact would be on the Hubble Space Telescope deploy operations. In our case, the arm worked beautifully and there were no problems at all with RMS checkout, and we got that done on time on flight day one. And the other major activity that was going on at that time was doing all the preparatory work for the potential spacewalk the next day.
Okay, what you're seeing here is the power ratchet tool, which is a device produced by the Goddard Space Flight Center, adapted specifically to work on the Space Telescope, both the maintenance and repair missions and for deploying the solar arrays, which, if done manually, required 120 full turns, and in suited tests underwater, it proven to be fairly fatiguing. This unit has its own internal battery, a high-performance electric motor, and a little microprocessor controller to control the speed, the torque, and the number of turns per trigger setting, or per trigger squeeze. Here you see some additional configuration of tools going into the airlock in preparation for the EVA that almost was.
In addition to configuring the airlock with about a dozen tools, most of which were unique to the HST possible deploy mission tasks, we had to conduct a pre-breathe, reduce the cabin pressure, and check out all three of the spacesuits we had. We had an upper torso assembly, which includes all the life support systems and computer monitoring systems on the suit, as a spare unit in the event that either of the primary suits for Bruce or I had developed a problem. All in all, it took Bruce and I the lion's share of our time on flight day one and a goodly measure of Charlie's time. Charlie was always the critical resource, being split between the RMS operations and the EVA.
Early in the morning on flight day two, which was actually less than 24 hours after launch, we were given a go for HST deploy operations, and that meant that I was go to uncradle the RMS and move it over and grapple the Space Telescope in the bay, which you see here. We're trying to convey a sense, I think, of how big the Space Telescope is, and the fact that the aperture door is bright and shiny and it's right in front of the windows. And all of that, as I had described in the pre-flight press conference, was of some concern to me, being able to see, to do the task. It was about as difficult as we had expected, and the views, as you can see here, out the window certainly degrade rapidly as the telescope begins to come out of the bay. Charlie was very helpful at talking me through the deploy operations with the arm, particularly, as I mentioned, down low in the bay where the clearances are fairly small and you're trying to go slowly. If you look carefully through the window, I think you'll be able to see the rate at which we were trying to move the HST up out of the bay. Slow is good when you have two very large vehicles very close together. And as you know, it took a little bit longer on orbit to do that task than we had simulated on the ground, and I think that's probably to be expected given the fact that we weren't really the pacing item in the deploy sequence anyway, and we wanted to make sure that the job was done properly. There are a number of coordinated activities that actually need to take place. It isn't just Charlie and me operating the arm, but Lauren has to position the vehicle, the orbiter vehicle, in the proper attitude so that the sun shines on the proper part of the Space Telescope, and he had to make a couple of different maneuvers in addition to manually holding the orbiter's attitude near where it wanted to be while the arm and the telescope were in motion. We had a number of constraints governing how the orbiter could move when the telescope was unberthed and when it was in motion, and he had to manage all of that very carefully.
We did find that this manual control of the orbiter using certain DAP settings or digital autopilot work very well, and have recommended that that be highly considered as a mode of orbiter control in large payloads like this.
After Steve lifted the telescope clear of the bay, he went through a number of maneuvers, the end result of which was getting the bottom or the base end of the telescope pointing forward. And after Lauren oriented the orbiter, this was pointed toward the sun. The solar array booms were folded out 90 degrees, and as you see here, the solar array panels were unrolled. You have to watch very closely because this is a rather slow process, taking on the order of 6 minutes to fully unreel these sets of solar array panels. There are 5 separate solar panel assemblies on each side of the center drum, 2 arrays on the entire telescope. The set that you see here, the plus V2 solar array, deployed very nicely. As I'm sure you're aware later on, there were some difficulties deploying the minus V2 array, which led Kathy and myself to finish the suiting up process and ultimately to get into the airlock, depressurize the airlock to 5 pounds per square inch, or approximately half the cabin pressure, and to stand by just inches away from the hatch and from the depress valve for about 2 hours until telescope separation and release from the orbiter was complete, and until Steve had completed berthing the RMS. Here you see the plus V2 array fully deployed. These arrays are a contribution from the European Space Agency along with the faint object camera, and represent 15 to 20% of their participation in the program.
When the solar array that had been giving us trouble was finally unfurled properly, we actually didn't have very much time until the release opportunity. As I recall, it was around 30 minutes or so. So there were a number of activities that Lauren and I had to do with Charlie's help, and Charlie was kind of going back and forth between the flight deck and the mid-deck throughout the day. We noticed that one of the surprises was the amount of clearance between the arm and the solar array at separation. It was a little bit less than we had been led to expect from the simulations that we had performed on the ground. However, the control of the arm was very precise, and the control of the orbiter at separation was very precise, and we had no concerns about contacting the arm with the solar array. But it was something that Lauren and I kept a very close eye on.
What you're seeing in this scene is actually the Space Telescope after release as we are flying over the western coast of Peru, actually crossing the Andes Mountains, and that to me was pretty spectacular from a visual sense.
Some of the information that we learned on this flight that we hope to pass on to whichever crew is selected to do maintenance and repair missions on the HST is the fact that the HST is highly visible. I guess you would expect that just because of the way it's configured with reflecting thermal blankets and the big solar arrays, also providing a lot of reflecting surface area. We could see it for a long time, of course, post-release. In addition, we found throughout the flight, every terminator, we would be able to see the HST reflecting sunlight, even at a distance of greater than 40 miles. That was a little bit of a surprise. Of course, as Bruce and Kathy can describe, this is not the end of anything, but the beginning of the lifetime of the telescope, and a lot of the work that they did on this flight will come back to produce results years from now as the maintenance missions are launched to service the telescope and keep it an operational observatory for years to come.
Yeah. As Steve has mentioned, it is designed for a 15 to 20 year lifetime as an observatory facility, with planned visits roughly every 5 years to replace those components which are known to degrade, such as the batteries and the solar arrays, to replace anything that fails, and also to provide the opportunity for exchanging scientific instruments as the data which comes back from the current set of 5 instruments is analyzed and perhaps reveals new pathways to explore. I talked with the folks in the Space Telescope Operations Control Center this morning. They have rearranged some elements of the checkout, bringing the scientific instrument checkout forward and working on some minor problems in the pointing and control system. But all in all, they feel like they're about on schedule in terms of the amount of checkout that's required. Here you see me looking at the protein crystal growth experiment. This is a secondary payload from the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And in this close-up shot, chamber C3, you can see some crystals of carboxyl ester hydrolase, which was one of the compounds. The idea here is to create large defect-free crystals in zero gravity that can be used under X-ray analysis to reveal the exact structure of the protein. And once the structure has been revealed, you can tailor antibodies or vaccines or other biological agents and then produce those to yield the desired effect. Unlike zero-G electrophoresis, where we were attempting to manufacture commercial quantities of substances, this is just designed to discover the structure and do the rest work on the ground.
This is one of the other secondary experiments we had. It was conceived of by a student at a high school at the time in Utah and sponsored by a corporation out there. What you see are three different views. The center one is the actual electrical arc being struck, and the two others are mirror views. And the idea was to look at what effects driving an arc and affecting it with outside magnetic fields would have in zero G.
We carried two IMAX cameras. One was the in-cabin camera that you see Kathy and me trying to get reloaded here. The other was the IMAX cargo bay camera, which we have not seen any of the film yet, but hopefully we'll see in another week or two.
This is one of our...
Here's the locale of Kathy's dad's fishing camp.
Yeah, that's about right. I was obligated to make sure I got a few good shots of some key places in Baja California for my father, but we also tried to put some of the spectacular Earth views that we had on film to give you a sense of both the scale of the view and the rate of passage, which is a little slower, of course, at this altitude than lower flights. In some of the stills, which we'll get to later, you may get a better appreciation of this. Here you're over central Mexico. The two bright dots at the upper center portion of the frame are the two large volcanoes just southeast of Mexico City, and if you strain a little bit, just up and to the left of those volcanoes, you may see a slightly lighter, grayer patch of ground, and that is in fact the urban area of Mexico City itself. It was easy to have all of Mexico, literally from the California-Mexico border to the Gulf Coast and on up to Houston, in your field of view at one time from our altitude, which was very spectacular.
In fact, as mentioned perhaps during the flight, on one pass roughly in this location going toward the east, we were puzzled to see a lake where we didn't recognize any lake should be, and on thinking about it, Lauren realized that it was Lake Michigan that we were seeing. And in fact, we later saw Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, being able to see entirely across the north-south width of the United States from over the Gulf of Mexico.
And here you're seeing across almost all of South America, from just slightly east of the crest of the Andes out to the coast by Rio de Janeiro. This was one of the least popular experiments aboard. I wondered whether anyone would still speak to me after this if I hadn't already been hit. This is something like 8 TB tests at once. There's a certain toxin on each one of those sets of tines, and the idea is to determine whether the body's response to immune system response varies at all in zero G. Some of the body's immune response, of course, is governed by the blood system, and another level of it is controlled by the cellular structure of the body, and the objective of this experiment specifically was to look at cell-mediated immune response and see if one mission specialist could survive administering it to two other people.
On the day before entry, we go through a series of tests that we call Flight Control System or FCS checkout. What Lauren, Steve, and I were doing here was actually going through various tests of the hydraulic system with the auxiliary power unit running, actually firing the RCS jets to make sure that they all operated properly, and make sure that all the systems on board were going to be good or go for the entry day. Our FCS checkout went very, very smoothly with only very insignificant anomalies which we had seen before on previous flights. This is, we were trying to get you some lightning, and you can see it over in the left, to the left of the Earth's limb there. That's one of the more spectacular scenes of nighttime, is the lightning all over the Earth. Just unbelievable when you get a chance to see it.
This is later in entry then. This is about Mach 6 taken from a tracking camera out at Vandenberg. We had been doing several aero PTIs on the way in, all the way through entry, to gather aerodynamic data to try to expand the flight envelope of the shuttle slightly. This is a scene here of we're rolling on the hack and coming around the heading alignment circle. You can see the sun on the very bottom of the wing there. That sun angle presented somewhat of a problem to Charlie and I as we flew right into it trying to turn on to the alignment circle. And it wasn't until we got more than halfway around the circle that we finally had the sun out of our eyes. Hard to read inside and then transition to outside.
I was fortunate that Lauren is a real gracious soul, and the pilot is kind of a misnomer. You're a co-pilot, but Lauren gave me an opportunity to fly the vehicle a little bit as we went subsonic, and I thought it performed amazingly well.
We've just come through the inner glide slope there, and once you start to pull the nose up, of course, you're losing all the precious airspeed that you had preserved at that point. Charlie lowered the gear about 300 feet above the ground, and we just came on in, establish an attitude, and kind of hold it for the landing. We had been sort of on again, off again for landing that day for the wind situation out at Edwards, as you probably recall. And we seemed to run out of airspeed a little bit quicker than normal that I'm used to in the STA, but the shuttle does have a lot of reserve capability there. So overall, the landing went very smoothly, and the nose wheel derotation rate continued to be very slow for the entire derotation. We also flew the new carbon brakes for the shuttle program for the first time. Those brakes turned out to work very well. They're very smooth and very positive. I think they'll be a great asset to the program as we continue to fly those on other vehicles now, and then look toward returning to KSC for landing. And of course, I planned that stop exactly in front of the tower with this camera in mind so we could get a new slant on things. And we did 30 or 40 minutes worth of post-landing cleanup switches and reconfiguring, and then we're ready to get out of the inside. Fairly cool outside that day. It was about 44 or 45 degrees wind chill factor, so we stayed inside the suits.
We had sent along the regular blue flight suits that we thought we were going to get into, but as Lauren mentioned, the wind chill factor made it desirous to just, and the combination of your heat inside the suit and the coolness of the desert air out there made it perfect.